So welcome to another edition of Ozarks Voices, the oral history project of the Missouri State University Libraries. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Libraries, and today's date is Saturday, October 30th of 2021. Tomorrow's Halloween. And our guest today is the Reverend Dennis Smith. And we're here in his condo, I guess. I don't know exactly what it is.
Kind of an apartment.
An apartment here in Springfield, Missouri. So, Reverend Smith, thanks very much for chatting with us this morning.
All right. Well, to start with, I prefer not to use the word reverend too much, if any, from here on.
Okay.
I have reasons for it, and even though I've been a minister for probably close to 60 years, in our organization we prefer not to be called reverend.
Okay.
Just brother or mister would be fine.
Okay. So let's begin with a question of where were you born?
Well, I was born in Crawford County, Arkansas, in a little community called 88. Now, 88 was an adjoining community to Hobtown. I spent most of my growing up years in the Hobtown community in an old typical Arkansas farmhouse.
Uh-huh.
And then I started out on my own when I was 16, finding work to do after I'd finished about a year in college.
Uh-huh.
And then things began to happen, and I'll listen to you and try to answer all your questions.
Okay, well, let's go back to growing up near Hobtown. So, did you have siblings?
Pardon me?
Did you have any siblings, brothers, sisters?
I had two sisters, both of them older than me.
Okay.
Each of us by 2 years. The oldest was born in 25, the next was born in 27, and I was born in 29.
29, okay. So you're about 82 years old, or 92 years old?
I will be in December.
Okay. Good for you, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
And I happen to know that your lovely bride, I think, if I remember correctly, was born the same day that Gordon McCann was born.
Yes,
Well, we don't
yes,
brag on that too much.
yes. We just say we're twins.
It was one of the happenstances of history. They
Yeah.
just happened to be born on the same day.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. And you said it was a typical farm, so what all did you, what did you grow and?
Well, first we'll talk about the house. It was an old one-room log house with two other oak siding with weather stripping, and we had 5 residents there for several years till we all grew up and left the farm.
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, people, especially men, wherever they could find something that they could work at, they took it. Now, my dad was away a lot. In the fall of the year, he worked in a cotton gin,
Mm-hmm.
but to go back to the farm, he had milk cows to milk, getting up and start your morning milking at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But and we had chickens and hogs, and of course a big garden every year, and Mother did a lot of canning. But most of our 80 acres that went with the house was blessed with persimmon sprouts and oak sprouts.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've had any acquaintance with anybody my age, they'll tell you how much fun it is to try to keep those knocked down all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And in the summertime, my dad would go to the wheat harvest in Kansas,
Mhm.
which later on he took me with him. We might talk about that later.
Okay. Did you attend, so there were 5 of you in the one-room home? There were 5 of you in the one-room home?
Well, we had the one-room log room,
Mhm.
and then they had lean-to type rooms. Later on, as we grew in size, Ned put what we call a sleeping porch on the back,
Mhm.
which really gave us another room.
Mhm.
I purposely made reference to the log room because that was our safe room, what we'd call a safe room today.
Mhm.
And every time a storm came up, we'd all huddle up in the old log room. And by the way, the farm itself was deeded to a Union soldier from the Civil War.
Hmm.
And it has quite a history, of course.
Mhm.
The old logs look like they should have been taken out 50 years before they were.
So, you attended school?
Yes, I actually started, I got a little ahead of my story. I started in the first grade at Alma Grade School in Alma, Arkansas. I spent the first grade there. And then we moved back up to Hobtown and the old farm. And from the second grade through the sixth, I had a wonderful and beautiful and a lady that I fell in love with for the first time, Miss Della. She taught 6 grades in one old typical Arkansas
Mm-hmm.
schoolhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the first grade at Alma, and I took the second through the sixth at Hobtown, and then we had to move on down the line a little further to a little town called Rudy, and all of these were connected with the main school at Alma.
Mm-hmm.
Consolidated is what I was looking for.
Uh-huh.
And I spent, I went from Hobtown to Rudy in the 7th grade. And while I was there, we would have the 7th and 8th grade we shared a room together.
Mm-hmm.
And before the year was out, the principal got a hold of my father and told him that it'd be a waste of my time and his if he kept me there. He gave me a double promotion to the 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent my high school, starting in the 9th grade, at Alma High School.
Mm-hmm. When you were living on the farm, so I'm guessing no indoor plumbing?
Are you kidding me?
And when did electricity come into your life?
Do what?
Electricity.
After I got out of high school,
Uh-huh.
and that was in 1946.
Uh-huh.
The REA, rural electrification, finally made it to Hobtown.
Okay. 46.
Yeah, it would have been in 46 or probably 47 before they actually got hooked onto the line.
Uh-huh. So when you went to high school, did you live at home or did you live in town?
No, we lived at home, and to go back to the chores, us kids all had chores to do in the early morning. I helped Dad with the milking, and the girls helped Mom get breakfast ready and so forth. And then we walked across the 80 acres to the main road going on down to Alma.
Mm-hmm.
It was about a 15-mile drive from where they picked us up to Alma. Now, it wasn't actually that far, but we dog-legged, if you know what I mean. They'd
Mhm.
pick kids up off of the main road and come back and so forth.
Mhm. So it was a school bus.
School bus,
that
yes.
picked you up and, yeah.
Old bus number 4, Alma, Arkansas.
So you'd have to walk across the field to
Yes.
catch the bus.
Yes.
Yeah. Any memories of, rainstorms or snowstorms or?
Well, I could tell a lot about that, but I'm going to just narrow it down.
Animals?
Well, we did. The only animal we saw along the way was our farm dog, old Chubby. He escorted us over there and waited for us and come up. And was there when we got off the bus in the afternoon.
Really?
But to get back to your question, where we caught the school bus right on the main road and on our home farm was a cluster of big bushy cedar trees. And my dad took his axe and cut some of those limbs back where we had a little tunnel like that would take us back in there. And believe me, on cold mornings, it was a haven for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was rain, sleet, or snow, we just had to endure it.
Mm. You could hear the bus coming?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, he had to go past us first, and then turn around and come back, and that would take about 5 minutes. So we had a little 5-minute leeway there.
And tell us about your high school years. Did you do any extracurricular activities?
Well, yes. I don't want to get too far involved because I'm kind of angry now that as I look back, that Dad allowed me to have a double promotion. I don't think I missed out on any book learning, but I was 16 when I graduated.
Yeah.
But as I started, like I said, in the 9th grade, and we went through the 9th grade. I'm going to get you off on a tangent now. And from the 9th to the 10th, we had moved to Berkeley, California, for my dad to work in the shipyards. And so I don't have a whole lot of memories about the 9th grade, but the 10th grade, Berkeley, California had probably enrollment of 3,000 to 5,000 students.
Yeah.
And I didn't get along too well with that, so they put a shipping tag on me and sent me back to Arkansas. So the interesting parts of my high school actually started when I got back to Alma in the 10th grade.
Okay.
And I always loved sports, and I didn't play any sports as a member of the team other than in PE.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but nonetheless, I was trying to compete with, even as a senior, 16 years old against boys a full year older.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah.
And that splashed over too into my college time, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
But as my 10th, 11th, and 12th grades came about, I participated in a lot of the little short plays that our teacher would, when it came her time to take care of the assembly, she always picked on me and some others. But before that was over, I was in another 2 plays, the junior play and the senior play, which was a full length, probably an hour and a half. And I still have some fond memories about play practice and all that.
Good. So you were 16 years old when you graduated from high school.
That's right.
So that would have been what, 1945?
No, it would have been 46.
Okay,
I entered in the 12th grade in the fall of 45.
45.
And left over to 46.
okay,
I graduated in, listen to this now, I graduated in April of 1946. Alma only had 8 months a year instead of 9. And the reason for that was the boys and girls too had outside work to do,
Had to
planting
help on-
and helping with the farm work.
help on the farm,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, how big was your high school class, graduating class?
Well, actually, the high school and the grade school were all on the same campus.
Uh-huh,
Now, the grade school's building was not attached to the high school, junior high and high school, but the first graders through the 12th graders all rode the same bus and got there at the same time. I think probably if we bunched the grade school kids and middle school and high school, we probably wouldn't have over 250 or maybe 300. I know in my graduating class of 1946, I think we had 44 seniors that graduated.
okay. What do you remember about the war years? So you were a young
I was
person during
13,
during the war years,
Well, of course, I was too young to go into the Army,
right?
but a lot of my knowledge of the war years was our going to California in an old Model A Ford with everything we owned, and it took us 7 days and nights to get from Fort Smith, Arkansas to Berkeley, California. Now, of course, most of that was on old 66 highway,
Yeah,
which was adjacent to the railroad.
yeah,
And it was unusual, and it just really stands out in my mind. At the trains, one would follow the other train and so forth, and they were packed with Army equipment like tanks and trucks and all that.
uh-huh,
And I know on one day they had a military tank maneuver, and we just stopped and watched that for a while. And then as we got on into California, now again I mentioned Berkeley, but Dad worked in the shipyards at Richmond. Now to get into that area, coming from east to west, you top out in a high peak that overlooks that San Francisco Bay Area. And it was a beehive of activity with military planes and ships and all of that. And I kept a scrapbook, especially on the airplanes. I kept a scrapbook on every military plane that was popular in those days, like the P-38, double fuselage, the P-40s, which was noted for their Flying Tiger experiences in China, and on down the line. And then when I got back to Arkansas, every time I heard a plane go over, I'd run out to see if it's one of them that I had in the scrapbook.
So you just spent 1 year out in the Bay Area.
Well, actually, we got out there, yes. I'm going to have to get you off on some tangents again.
That's all right.
I believe I'm correct in saying it was 1944 when we got out there then. And then I came back to high school in Alma. Then we went back out there in the early summer of 1946. And before school started, I came back and stayed with my aunt and uncle for the rest of that school year.
Okay, all right. And the rest of your family stayed out in California?
Well, yes and no. We came back from Berkeley the second time now. And my dad had an old 30 Model A Ford, and he had a couple of friends from the Hobtown area that had worked there. And so we loaded up the old Model A Ford and came back to the farm. And Dad and I worked on the farm while Mother and my two sisters stayed out in California
Okay.
and finished that summer before they came back.
Okay. So you graduated from high school, then what happened in your life?
Well, I've got all of that in the book that I had written, but since you asked me, I'll tell you. Mother, bless her heart, was bent on my going to college. And she, during the summer of 1946, had sent off and got a catalog from the College of the Ozarks at Clarkesville. Now, it wasn't the same as Hollister, but it had the same name then. It's University of the Ozarks today, down at Clarksville, Arkansas. So she communicated with them, and then probably as early as the 1st of August, not past the middle of August, I went down there to work. And I'm not going into all of that, but during the fall, I worked, well, back up a little bit. When I first got in there, several of us made up of the work parties, and we worked outside, raking leaves and all that. And then when school actually started, I worked in the college cafeteria. I had to get over there somewhere about 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning to help get everything set up. And then we repeated that at noon and in the evening. And you had to do a lot of hustling to get to your classes at 8 o'clock after all that. But I found a release in, around the 1st of November when basketball practice started. I went out for basketball. Now, this is one of the most interesting and enjoyable and disappointing parts of my college life. And that particular time, a lot of the GIs were coming home, and I didn't have enough sense to know that the coach had already picked out probably his main team, and they might have been on scholarships for all I know. But I went out like you did in high school, you know. And again, we'll make this story as short as we can. At that time, I was about 5'10", maybe 5'11", and weighed 129 pounds. Well, you should have seen the kind of guys that made up the main team. Most all of them were GIs that had played military ball too. Well, I knew I couldn't make the main team, but I just went out to kind of as a walk-on, you know.
Right.
And we'll make that story short. But right after the first of the year, I went by the coach's office. He always posted the team or the traveling squad, you know, for the next game, and my name was on it. So I finished out going to places like University of Arkansas. We played the Frost team there. We played Arkansas Tech. We played Arkansas College at Batesville. We played Northeastern State College at Tahlequah, and the same place down in southwest Oklahoma at Durant. And as the season ended, we won second place in that conference. We missed out on first place But some kid, probably not much older than me, had just come in the game with seconds to play, and he sunk one from center line and knocked us out, and they got to first place.
Yeah.
But that didn't stop us. We got invited, the college did, to bring our team to Denver, Colorado to participate in the NIA,
Yeah.
National Hammett, National Intercollegiate. It's the same as the NIT today.
Right.
And I got bumped, and me and another kid got bumped.
Oh.
That put a quietus on my hopes and the desires to play ball and then become a coach.
Uh-huh.
But unfortunately, I had to quit and go to work,
Yeah.
and that's what I did.
Okay. What was your first job out of?
Well, the first job, man, even as a kid, I worked in the community and had an old plow mare. I'd go around and break up the gardens in the
Oh, yeah.
spring and help like that. But as you say, or as I said, the first real job was selling shoes in a little rinky-dink shoe store in Van Buren, Arkansas, that my aunt, by marriage, managed. And that, I worked at that for a while, actually only about 3 or 4 weeks. And then I was offered another job with a chain store out of St. Louis that had a store in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I got on over there, which was better pay.
Uh-huh.
Even though we didn't know what the pay was going to be, I found out after I started, you didn't get any kind of a guarantee, but they would pay you 7% on everything that you sold.
So commission, basically.
Commission, yeah.
Yeah. Selling shoes or other things too?
Well, we had mostly shoes, but we had hosiery and shoe polish,
Right.
and well, I guess that's about it. We had both. It was a family shoe store.
Okay.
Children's shoes, women's shoes, and men's shoes. And you might be interested in knowing that the highest price shoe that we had in the store was a man's Florsham for $10.95. We had a lot of children's shoes, $1.99, $2.99,
Yeah.
and our hot numbers were the ladies' dress shoes. We had a whole bunch of what we called 199s, which was a ladies' high heel sling pump in I think about 8 different colors.
Mm-hmm.
So in the course of 47, I spent about 18 months there, and a job opened up with this same company in Springfield, Missouri. They had a little shoe store on East St. Louis, there where we're at. I have to get my mind to click in.
So it was on East St. Louis, just
Yeah.
off the square, was it, or?
No, the office was in St. Louis,
Yeah.
but they made me manager.
Uh-huh.
It sat on the corner of St. Louis and Robinson.
Okay.
It was more of a little alley there, Robinson.
Right.
And I stayed there until I got fast forward here, I got a very tender letter from the President of the United States. And it opened up by saying, greetings. and me and 10,000 more other fellas, the Korean War had started.
Yeah.
But then I was anchored pretty much in Springfield,
Yeah.
but I had to give the job up to answer the call to go to service.
Did you serve in the Navy?
Well, while I was in Fort Smith, they had a Naval Reserve unit there, and I joined the Naval Reserve I was only 18. And when I came up to Springfield, they didn't have a Naval Reserve unit at that time. And so I actually got my call for the Army, and I answered the call and took my physical, believe it or not, in Texarkana, Arkansas. But before I went to Texarkana, my bosses in St. Louis came in unannounced and wanted me to pack up and go to Texarkana, where they had a new store to open up. And I refused it because I knew probably that I was going to have to go to the Army if I couldn't make plans otherwise. And so I resigned my work in the shoe business forever. And when I found out I had to take my physical for the Army, I couldn't believe it was Texarkana, Arkansas. I think I had all the Texarkana that I wanted. So I came back, and at that time it's probably in the middle of November, and I was waiting. I passed for my physical, of course, and I was waiting to be called. And this time I started working at the Central Printing Company with Carolyn's father. And of course by then, Carolyn Clark's father had a beautiful daughter named Carolyn, which back in August on her birthday, I had given her an engagement ring.
Okay.
So I was gambling on the military, wanting to stay home as long as I could, and especially Christmas, if I possibly could. But in the meantime, I was visiting my mother and dad in Arkansas, and I went into the Naval Recruiting Office there in Fort Smith, and I told the recruiter my problem. He said, well, son, you're probably already in the Navy. He said, do you remember your serial number? And I said, oh, yes. So he ran it down, and he said, I told him I was trying to beat the Army.
Yeah.
And so he said, all you've got to do is just go active duty, which I did. And the first thing that I did after boot camp, I got shipped to Guam, and from Guam, the little ship I was on, started working in Korea. And that's a long story. And I was quite pleased now that I look back of all of my military service. But I hated all 4 years of it. And now I'm quite proud
You're proud of it now, yeah. So what'd you have to do when you were in the military? What was your role?
Well, after we got to our permanent duty station, which was a little light freighter, which by the way was the same freighter that the movie Mr. Roberts with
Henry Fonda?
Henry Fonda.
Yeah.
After I actually got out, that movie was filmed on my ship. Now, to answer your question, the little ship was USS Hewell, Hewell, AKL 14, and we hauled everything that they needed in Korea, and we always laughed and said, we didn't know if it was bombs or beans, but we took it up there.
Yeah.
And we worked back and forth between Japan and Korea in that capacity.
Supply ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But unknown at the time, it was some time on my second tour over there that I found out that the Hewell, they had, I think, either 6 or 7 battle stars that were awarded to the shipping people that were in Korea, and the Huel got every one of them. Now, that doesn't mean that I got the 7. I got, because the Huel had been over there before I got on board. But anyway, I stayed on the Huel for about 22 months, and I had made a request to go to a yeoman school in San Diego, which they allowed me to do that. But to answer your question, I work in the captain's office most of the time, doing clerical work and what have you. And I covered a lot of ground in that escapade.
Now let's go back. You mentioned that you became engaged to Carolyn Clark, but you didn't say how you met. When did you first meet?
I don't know if I should tell you or not. No, we met on a blind date.
Really?
But it was really blind to both of us. She had a dear friend, by the way, it was Dr. George Griot's fiance then, and became his wife. But she and Carolyn were great buddies. And she had invited me and Carolyn, but we, neither one of us knew that she'd be there or that I'd be there.
Right.
And George,
You didn't know you were going on a date.
no. George was helping a little church out in the Republic. They didn't have a preacher. He'd go down there and make talks for them. And that was on a Sunday night. So they picked up Carolyn first, and she was in the back seat. And then they picked me up, and I think it about scared her to death. And she has said 1,000 times since then, if I'd known it was a blind date, I'd have stayed home.
You'd never met, huh?
No.
Oh,
But the way we met is interesting, if you want to hear that.
yeah.
By this time, I was in Springfield working there in the shoe store,
All right.
and I had a sleeping room, and I'd eat my lunch, and sometimes 3 meals a day. I had a little cafe that sat on south Jefferson, almost across from the Colonial Hotel, which was on St. Louis. And the fellow that ran that was named Sullivan. And
What was the name of the restaurant? Do you
It
remember?
was named Dale's Grill. I never could figure it out. I think it must have been Dale's Grill. He had come down from Detroit or something, and had probably purchased it from whoever Dale's Grill was. And so I'd been eating there quite frequently. Now, in the meantime, my mother was friends with Dolores Griot's aunt, and they got to chit-chatting back and forth. And you know how mothers are, well, how's Dennis getting along? And mother said, well, he's kind of blue about it, because that particular winter back at Lee's, we had one day, we had about 7 or 8 inches of snow on the ground, and my cash register at the end of the day showed $13. That was my daily sales. Well, I was kind of blue about all that, so the aunt in Arkansas, her name was Smith also, but we weren't related. So she writes her sister, Mrs. Sullivan, and Dolores was, I guess, about 18 in those days, that they needed to see me and invite me to go into church and some other active where there was young people. Well, I can still see it. By this time, spring had sprung and things were picking up, and we had some nice traffic there for a while. But anyway, I looked up and I saw Mrs. Sullivan and Dolores coming into the shop. Now, they knew me by face, but they didn't know me by name. So when I asked if I could help them, they said, we'd like to speak to the manager. And they looked at me and they said, you mean you're the manager? I was 19 years old. And so it was through that association that we got, I won't say mixed up, with the Sullivan family. Became dear friends, and we used to double date a lot with Dolores and George Griot. I don't know if you knew George Griot or not.
No.
He was a dentist.
Okay.
So that might be a good place for us to go to something else.
So after your service in the Navy, what happened?
Well, I think this is important, so I'm going to go back to the Navy for another round of it.
All right.
After that, I finished the Yeoman A School in San Diego. I got reassigned to an LSMR. Now, an LSMR is a landing ship rocket. The war was still on in Korea, and again, my job then was working in the captain's office, and I got to reading the war diaries from over there. And on their first tour, that is the LSMR now, they got in so close they were pinned down at different occasions with small arms fire on the beach. And I wasn't too happy about that. But as we started over on my second tour, and we had two other LSMRs in convoy with us, news came that the truce had been signed. And so that kind of changed the picture. And I'll not go into that, but even though the truce was signed, our operations were interrupted many times by air raid warnings that never did materialize. So in the course of that, I don't know if you know much about the history of the Korean conflict, but we weren't the only force over there. The British had ships over there, the Australians had ships over there. And in fact, on that second tour, when we were up in the Korean area, we were under the command of a British frigate. He was, the captain of that ship was the senior officer president. Well, we got a message from him that their yeoman, same rate as mine, had taken suddenly ill. Could they send over someone to help them? So they sent me over there, and I spent 10 days on a British frigate, putting up with with the tay and the spot polish language. But anyway, after the 10 days, they sent me back to my ship. And in the course of time, I came down with hepatitis. And at that time, our ship was down in Hong Kong. And the only place that they had a hospital was the British Royal Naval Hospital. So there I stayed for another 10 days. And finally, I wound up in the Naval Hospital in Yokosuka, Japan. So my hospitalization, counting the 10 days in the British hospital and two different U.S. hospital ships, I was in the hospital a total of about 3 months. So then I had to be reassigned. So here again I was reassigned to the USS Delta, which was a tender, what am I trying to say? Destroyer tender. We had everything in the world on there, from a carpenter shop to blacksmith shop, malt baking shops. So I finished my tenure on the Delta, and we finally came back to the States by way of the Philippine Islands. And I spent the rest of my Navy career aboard the Delta, and my enlistment expired, and then I got discharged there. Now I'll make one more stop on the Delta. The captain had written me up a real nice recommendation, and I've got it in the book. And so when I got back to Springfield, I went back. Well, we got married after that first tour in Japan. We left that out, unfortunately. But anyway, I went back and started working for her dad at Central Printing Company down on South Jefferson. It was right across the street from the YWCA. I don't know if you go back that far or not.
Well, they just tore it down a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was more than that.
Yeah.
But not the YM, but the YW.
Yeah.
The
on the
YM was
east.
on the west side of Jefferson, and the YW was on the east side, a little bit south.
Right.
But anyway, I worked with him there until they retired, and Carol and I just bought them out and finished our John Q. Public customer. I believe it's in 1995, wasn't it? 1995. And then in the meantime, I helped with a little church up at Bolivar that got without a preacher. I went up there just to help them out. As we used to say, we didn't think we were smart enough to be a real preacher, but we'd made a few talks. So I'll make this a long and short thing too. I went up there in the spring of 1958, and on an agreement I just helped them until they got someone. They didn't get someone until 26 and a half years later.
You stayed 26 and a half years.
Well, I drove back and forth.
Drove back every
First, I
every
just went
week.
up there on Sunday morning to help them. And then as time went on, I'd help them on Sunday night and Wednesday night, and even had a radio program. This is interesting too, as part of my history. I didn't know that Bolivar even had a radio station, but I found out later. One of our officers in the church come by and said, "How are you on the radio?" I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. But again, to make a long story short, I would cut a tape here in Springfield on an old Sears and Roebuck's reel to reel, take it down to the bus station and put it on the bus, and they would drop it off on a Saturday, and then one of the men from the church would go by and get it and take it over to the station. I had that program for 10 years, and finally after 26 and a half years, I just decided I needed to leave there. But that wasn't the end of my preaching career, and if you want to, I can pick up there, or we can go to something else.
No, that's fine. So you've given your papers to the Missouri State University Libraries. We're very grateful for that.
Well, you're sure welcome.
I do recall that I believe in those papers, whenever you were going to do a funeral service, you would write out what you were going to.
I tell everybody, I actually grew up in those 26 and a half years at Bolivar. And I think I finally learned how to get up there and make a talk. That lasted more than 7 or 8 minutes. But during that time, I became kind of notorious among churches of Christ in Dallas County, Polk County, Dade County, and of course, Greene County and the churches here in town.
Mhm.
And we had a lot of friends in each of those congregations. And most of those congregations just had part-time. And the little part-time Sunday preachers couldn't just quit their jobs
Mhm.
and go preach a sermon. So I was called on many times, even after I left Bolivar and started working with two other congregations here. I think my book, I have it in there, over those years, I'd either preach independently without helpers or would help someone else. 470 funerals.
470 funerals.
Yeah, I actually have a record of that.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think they picked up my files on the funerals service. Well, you know what they're going to do.
Yeah. That's just amazing. The 470 funerals.
Now, also in that period of time, and even some of the time with the other two congregations, I would be invited in as a guest speaker at different places.
Uh-huh.
I've preached at probably 40 or 50 little congregations to help them out over the years.
Hmm. So you've lived in the Ozarks your entire life.
I've lived in the Ozarks and Arkansas and Missouri almost 92 years.
Yeah. Except for your military service.
Yeah.
You did some television programs?
Oh yeah.
10 years.
After I left Bolivar, I had no idea what I was going to do as far as my preaching career. About at this time we were working still with a printing company.
Yeah.
So when I left Bolivar, I had no idea what I was going to do. Before the next Sunday, a church in Buffalo called me and wanted me to go over there. And so I helped them out. Their main preacher was a missionary to Africa, and he was on a tour over there for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing led to the other. I'd kind of feel it here and there. And the church at Kansas Expressway needed a preacher. And they came in and asked me if I'd help them out the way I had helped them out in Bolivar. And I said, well, yeah. And I knew it wasn't going to be over maybe a week or two or whatever. So I agreed that I'd help them till they got a preacher. 10.5 years later, they had a preacher.
I'm seeing a pattern start to develop here.
So that goes into another interesting chapter.
Yeah.
They were, at that time, Kansas Expressway had a 30-minute television program. So I took that as part of my chores for for my agreeing to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted 10.5 years. And
So
then
what channel was it on?
10,
Channel 10?
Channel 10.
All right. Was it live or was it taped?
It's taped.
Okay.
We
And
had-
what roughly what years, what span of years was your program?
Are you saying what were the calendar years?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I won't get it right, but I think I left there in 1995, didn't I?
85 to 95.
95.
Yeah.
It would have been probably early 80s to 95.
Uh-huh. Half-hour program every week?
Well, we'd cut 2 programs at the
Yeah.
same time. Every other week,
Yeah.
we had a singing group that came in from different congregations
Mm-hmm.
in the area to help us out. And it was amazing how loyal they were. Rain, sleets, or snow, they were there every other Monday night to help us with the music aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, they finally found what they would call a full-time preacher. I was in an audience of several people, and they were talking about my being a part-time preacher. And one of our ladies that was a very good friend of ours said, "Don't call him a full-time preacher. He was an overtime preacher." But I found time to work that in one way or the other.
Uh-huh. So that lasted until 1995?
Yes, I believe that's right.
Okay.
But then I was invited to go over to the old North National Church of Christ. You see, in those days we had a North National Church of Christ and a South National Church of Christ. And by that time I was getting up into my early 80s.
Those 70s.
I was corrected at 70s. Yeah, you're talking about my years.
Yeah.
But anyway, I worked with them, helping out the full-time pulpit minister when needed.
Uh-huh.
And also, my specialty was I became the seniors minister.
Golden Age.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with them for 15 years. And now from that time, the Old North National Church, it was at National and High, where that group got started back in the 30s or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
And we built a brand new church out on I-44, right across the street from the Baptist church that's got that humongous facility there.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to joke, my Baptist friends, they saw what a nice little church we wanted. They had to try to outdo us. But
So you did that till 2010?
yeah, roughly now.
About
See, my
20.
mind is not
longer than
thinking
that.
as fast as it should.
It was longer than that, wasn't it? Did he was still doing the Golden Age stuff
Yeah.
after 2010.
Oh, yeah, it was 2015. He had a,
Well, let's back up from,
Maybe I should ask you, have you retired yet?
I have finally retired.
he had a little mini stroke
Uh-huh.
teaching the auditorium class on
Uh-huh.
Sunday morning.
Uh-huh.
And it was in, I think,
My
May.
goodness, we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, we're,
May of 2015.
He
May of
has been
2015.
asked to lead devotionals here at Spring House,
really?
and so far he's declined.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Well, you're sure welcome. It's our
I
pleasure.
appreciate it.
I've still got your card there.
Okay,
You
call me anytime.
you wouldn't have any Arkansas relatives down there by the name of Peters, would you?
No, but I didn't want to, my grandfather sold shoes,
Oh.
and my father served in the Navy.
Oh, there you go.
Now, who was your father?
John Merrill Peters, he was from eastern Iowa. I grew up in Iowa.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been good.
Well,
Thank you.
I
thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much.